Hey, today we're going to be doing my top 5 most owned authors. And that means just the top 5 authors who I own the most books of. And I'm going to say this, some people split up the most owned and most read because there's an author they've read a lot of, but they don't actually own most of their books. I tend to buy all the books that I read. So, with the exception of Tolkien, I've read all of the books that I have, pretty much. So those are probably my top 5 most read authors. Give or take a book or two maybe, but that's for the first two. So we'll start from 5 and work our way up to number 1. I want to try to keep this short. So my 5th most read author is James Baldwin, which is all this year. So I have Going to Meet the Man, which is a collection of short stories. His first novel, Go Tell It on the Mountain. His second novel, Giovanni's Room. And I believe his third novel, Another Country. And then the essay collection, The Fire Next Time. So I own 5 books by him. And there was sort of like a 5-way tie at the 5th position with 5 books. And he won out because he's my favorite of the people. There's also John Green, Jack Kerouac, and George R.R. Martin were the other ones that were kind of right in that range. And then we have Ayn Rand, Edith Wharton, J.D. Salinger, and Gabriel Garcia Marquez were all right there too. But I just went with him. Now, my number 4 most owned author with 6 books owned is Jon Krakauer. And I have 3 Cups of Deceit, Where Men Win Glory, Under the Banner of Heaven, In the Thin Air, Into the Wild, and Eager Dreams, I'm not sure how you say that word. So this one's kind of like a short story collection all about mountaineering. In the Wild's about the guy who went out and lived in the wild, Chris McCandless. Into Thin Air is about an expedition to Everest that Jon Krakauer was a part of, where there was a tragedy. Under the Banner of Heaven examines a specific murder case of a murder committed by Mormon fundamentalists. And then it also examines like the history of the Mormon faith and then how the FLDS is separate from the LDS and kind of how they came to be. And then Where Men Win Glory is about Pat Tillman, the American football player who put his football career on hold to go serve in the armed forces after September 11th. And kind of like what happened to him. And there's a lot of stuff. It's really involved. Kind of the history of the region and why we're involved. Anyway, so this is nonfiction. And if you've read Into the Wild and loved it, I highly suggest you read his other stuff because it's all really good. And although it might be about different like subject matter, he is a really good writer for trying to make it interesting to read about these like historical events or nonfiction type settings. And if you're just trying to get into nonfiction and you want to start somewhere, I would suggest him. I really like his writing. Okay, coming in at number 3, my 3rd most owned author is JRR Tolkien. And with that we have 5 books. We have the book, or he's 8 or 10, depends on how you want to count it. We have The Book of Lost Tales number 1, The Book of Lost Tales number 2, The Lays of Beleriand, The Shaping of Middle-earth, and The Lost Road and Other Writings. Then we also have, The Silmarillion, The Hobbit, and The Lord of the Rings. And this is where you could count this as 3 books, but technically mine's just one big book, so I count it as 1, which brings them to 8. So I haven't actually read The Lord of the Rings. I have read The Silmarillion, I've read The Hobbit, and I've read parts of The Lost Tales #1. So a lot of the extra books I haven't read yet because I wanted to read The Lord of the Rings, and I just got that. So yeah. Okay, moving right along. My second most owned author is John Steinbeck. And for that we have... Sorry, I have these like all in stacks. Journal of a Novel, which the journal entries he wrote every day as he was writing East of Eden. Travels with Charlie in Search of America, which I've reviewed, fantastic. The Winter of Our Discontent, which I think was his last published novel. I haven't actually read this one, but it's definitely on my list for the summer. Once There Was a War, which is made up of like dispatches he wrote while he was covering World War II. To a God Unknown. Sorry. This is one of his really early novels and was widely criticized at the time, but I actually found really interesting. It is problematic. It's weird, but it's very interesting. You should read it. I'm probably going to read it again. It's really short. It's only like, it's under 200 pages, I think. Yeah, under 200. But definitely worth checking out. Then we have, arguably my favorite novel of all time. I need to read this again, too. East of Eden. And this is a gorgeous edition. I really love it. I also have a different edition of it somewhere, but I didn't count it twice. But yeah, East of Eden. Then I know this is a shame for a Steinbeck fan, but I haven't actually read this book yet. I plan on reading it during the summer. And that's The Grapes of Wrath, again in this really cool edition. I know it's kind of shameful that I haven't actually read it. Need to fix that. And then here we have, and I counted these all separately because technically they are all separate little books. You can buy them separately, and they're just the one story. So, you know, if you don't like it, bite me. I just happen to have the one where they're all collected together. And that is the short novels. See, they even called short novels. Tortilla Flat, The Moon is Down, The Red Pony, Of Mice and Men, Cannery Row, and The Pearl. I've read all of these except Cannery Row, which I need to get around to. And John Steinbeck is also one of my favorite authors. If I were going to do a top 5 favorite authors, it would probably go Hemingway, Baldwin tied for first, Steinbeck second. And then it gets tough. Then it gets into just a drag out fight for who else is in there. But yeah, I used to hate Steinbeck. Like when I was younger, I hated him. Because the first thing I tried to read of his, well, I read Of Mice and Men, I liked it in school, but the first thing I tried to read was The Grapes of Wrath, and at the time I just wasn't in the mood for it, and I kept trying to force myself and hated it. So I never got very far, and then I ended up hating Steinbeck, and then a friend of mine finally convinced me. He's like, just read East of Eden, because he was dating a girl and she loved it, and she made him read it. And he didn't like Steinbeck either for the same reason. And then, this was like after high school, I started reading East of Eden, and I was like, oh my god, this is the greatest thing ever. And then I started reading his short novels, and fell in love. Okay, are you ready? Right now, I'm wondering, can you guess who my most owned author is? It should be easy. And by far, by far my most owned author. When I counted it, actually, it's kind of ridiculous. Like, where the difference between Steinbeck and my topmost author are 10 books. 10 whole books more that I own. So coming in at 23 books, my number one most owned author is Ernest Hemingway. So we'll do these quick. The Sun Also Rises. Ooh, gotta clear out a spot now. The Torrents of Spring. A Farewell to Arms. To Have and Have Not. For Whom the Bell Tolls. Across the River and Into the Trees. The Old Man and the Sea. Islands in the Stream, The Garden of Eden, True at First Light. Then we have A Movable Feast, and The Movable Feast, the Restored Edition. And then we have Death in the Afternoon, which is just this fat book about bullfighting. But he has some cool photos in here. Like, oh, you can see that. But yeah, this thing is nonfiction, just all about bullfighting. How to do it, what to look for, all that. The Green Hills of Africa. Well, I didn't count this, but it's Ernest Hemingway on writing. Men Without Women, another short story collection. The Nick Adams stories. In Our Time. The short stories, collected short stories of Ernest Hemingway. The Fifth Column, which is his only play that he ever wrote. The Snows of Kilimanjaro and Other Stories. And what's this one? Death in the Afternoon. Oh, no. Sorry. I already said that. The Dangerous Summer. And for any of you who are counting, we're like, well, that's only 22. I don't understand. I counted. I also have, I forgot to grab it, the Hemingway Library edition of A Farewell to Arms, which is hardcover. The dust jacket's the original artwork. It also includes a bunch of appendices that have like drafts, alternate titles, alternate endings, and so you can kind of see how he worked to his revision of how he ended with the final novel. So I count that separately. I mean, it's its own thing. And I didn't count it, but I also have a first edition of A Farewell to Arms in my bookshelf over there. So yeah. As you can see, I own quite a bit of Hemingway. Which is why he's also one of my favorite writers. And I have to apologize because every time someone starts talking about Hemingway, it's like a whole thing. I'll have to make like a whole... At some point, it was always been my goal at some point to make a whole series of videos just about Ernest Hemingway and kind of get in there. And you know what? I might start... I have to read The Sun Also Rises again for a class this semester. So that might be the first in that series. Because, one, I think he's a really talented writer. But I also think it's in vogue right in now for, I don't know, the last 20 or so years, even in like academic circles, to kind of bash on Ernest Hemingway, because it becomes difficult to separate the man from his work. And anyway, I've had different discussions with different professors about Hemingway and their stance on him and what they think, as far as his reputation as like a misogynist or you know, sexism or anything like that. And I've had some actually really interesting discussions. So that's why sometimes I'm like compelled when people start talking about Hemingway, but the only thing they've read is like, you know, they've just read one book and then they hate it. Like they only read The Sun Also Rises, which I think is a masterpiece anyway, but I can get why some people think it's boring. Or they just read, you know, one of his works and they write him off. I think it's kind of unfair. But I'm going to stop trying to preach to you now about Hemingway. And hopefully that doesn't, like, upset anybody that I own a bunch of Hemingway. I always feel... See, that's how bad it is. I feel like I have to, like, justify. Like, it's a dirty thing. Like, I'm not allowed. But anyway, I like him. So, anyway, hopefully this was interesting for you guys. Any questions or comments? Comment down below. That was redundant. Sorry, I'm tired. And I will talk to you guys later.